Okay, so we're back with our 12th episode of the Utility Strategy Podcast, the first infrastructure podcast to shine a light on what we love to call utility strategy. As we all know, buried utilities pose an enormous risk to any infrastructure project and create extreme uncertainty amongst the different stakeholders. Thing is that with the right utility strategy, we're able to mitigate that risk and streamline our project, which is what our podcast is all about. Sharing and gaining all kinds of insights that will enable just that, helping project managers, utility coordinators, estimators, mappers, planners, designers, engineers, and any other stakeholder overcome the challenges of buried utilities in our right-of-way. To help us do just that, we have here with us today Jason Martschuk. Am I saying this correctly?
Yeah, I just say Martschuk, but my grandfather, who is Ukrainian, would probably be very proud of the way you pronounced it the first time through. So.
Okay, good. Yeah, awesome. So Jason is a senior VP sales of ProStar, which offers precision mapping solutions that capture record and display locating and SUE efforts in real time. Jason has been part of the mapping infrastructure industry for quite a while, taking on key roles in companies like Oracle, Hexagon, and others. Jason, without further ado, let's dive right into it. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me, guys. It's a pleasure to be on these shows. I recently, I'll do a little plug here. About a month ago, I did one for the Geoholics podcast, and it was fun. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, we love those guys.
It's amazing when someone puts a few letters in front of your job title, and all of a sudden you get invites to do these kind of things. It's pretty fun. Pretty fun, to be honest. So I really appreciate the offer to come on with you guys. No, your intro is on point. I joined ProStar February 15th of 2021. So coming up just, a little over 10 months.
Look at that. So you are a COVID hire.
I am a COVID hire. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I am a COVID hire. There's, COVID babies, COVID hires, all these kind of things that are out there now. We can we'll plug those terms 20 or a generation down the line. But yeah, that is me. And it was really neat, coming on board. We will get into the solution more, but it was really neat to be able to join right after our company went publicly traded. And then we released our flagship application, PointMan, which anybody who knows SaaS solutions, software as a service, when they drop, they're kind of in pseudo beta for almost perpetuity, right? But I mean, we're still, there's a maturation process that is coming on. So, right now, start of this calendar year, which aligns with the fiscal year, I'd kind of say we're, how would I describe? We're almost in like year one of sales, really, that we've got a plan to kind of take off. But, before I joined, I'd spent time with Oracle's construction and engineering global business unit, which is awesome. I mean, Oracle is always gives you an eye on what good looks like. The follow the dollar, the commercial entanglements they have are really good insight into how to do business. And then, as you mentioned, prior to that, I was with Hexagon and Intergraph. So if people aren't familiar with that company, Hexagon was a Swedish company that acquired Intergraph, which was actually based out of Huntsville, Alabama. And they generally had two trains of business. One was security, government, and infrastructure, which implied a little bit more geospatial from a contextual perspective, and then a process and power and marine division, which is actually the division I joined, oddly. But that was a lot of your industrial engineering, refining, petrochemical, that type of stuff. So there is entanglement there as well, a little bit of cross-pollination between the two arms of the business. But it was really great. I think, some of the topics we're going to talk about today really, were hammered home during my time at Hexagon Intergraph. And then before that, you kind of just, you're getting your bearings, getting your feet for the first half of your career. And that was with Amec, which is a tier one EPC. I'd kind of put them on par with your Fluors, your Jacobs,
It is not Amec anymore.
No, it isn't. It went from
they're part of a Wood.
Wood
PLC.
That's it. And the funny thing is, and this is the nature of. We could wax on this for a long time, or pontificate. But I see a lot of things in the industry, and it's difficult because when you think about engineering companies, there's almost always been this race to the floor, depending on the economic conditions at the current time. And it's like, when that happens, the race to the floor in terms of their pricing and whatnot, there's only so many that can survive on a large scale. And it seems like that's why you get these
amalgamations and mergers.
Yeah, you really do. Right. I mean, it's odd, but anyways, that was a career arc. So kind of, you come out of school, you have a degree in geography, GIS, with a minor in computer science. It's like, okay, what do I do? Well, basically all I've done is proved I know how to learn. And since then, that's been the arc, right? Like kind of 25 years of learning on the fly.
You graduated from McGill, I believe?
No. University of Calgary.
Oh, okay. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
What year did you graduate?
But so I graduated, what was it? 99?
Okay, so hey, we might have crossed paths.
So a little bit. We may have. So I graduated high school in 94, and then I played hockey for a year. Tried to see if I could, get maybe a scholarship or whatever. That wasn't, happening. So then I went back to school, and it was kind of like, because I started halfway through a year, I kind of took 4.5 years to complete. So I was basically done in 99, aside from one course. So I had to take one course in the spring to graduate. So yeah, I did the long duration school rather than short duration.
So I'm going to ask you what the best day at the UFC was. Was it Bermuda Shorts Day?
Yeah. The last Thursday before exams. That was always
Bermuda Shorts Day. That's I remember I remember Widemouth Mason being there the year I was. Do you remember that year?
There was that. I remember one of the first years too. They had Tragically Hip, which was like, that was no small feat to get. Yeah. But that was, talk about things are different now, right? There was they encouraged heavy drinking back in those days. In fact, I remember with the student ID, you could go down on Bermuda Shorts Day to the Fox and Firkin, and for like a quarter, they'd give you 10 drink tickets on Bermuda Shorts Day. Like, in what world does this make any sense at all? But of course, when you're like 20, you're like, this is the greatest day ever, So it was good.
Yeah, but looking back, so Jason, it seems like when we take a look at your career, it seems like you've kind of been part of the SaaS world of infrastructure for the majority of your career. So how have you seen it develop? Like, because if we're real for a second, if we're genuine, if we're true to ourselves, we can say that the construction, civil engineering industry is a bit behind regarding technology and implementing of technology in our SOPs.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. So number one, when I look, so when I joined, if I can go back and I'll provide a little bit of context for my answer here. But like when I was at Amec, an EPC, we did a bespoke GIS system for the city of Calgary. It was for all of its riverine assets. So it was like really, it was water civil type of work, right? So we're looking at like areas where there was riprap or, where we had outfall locations or, poured concrete support, this kind of stuff, groins extending into the river to prevent erosion, all that type of stuff. Okay. So there was the effort to capture that information and then document it and tie it into an enterprise system that could be used with parks and rec so they could see adjacencies where work was happening and they could kind of, be cheaper by the dozen in terms of executing their work. I love doing that. And I worked very closely with a design team in Nashville that did a lot of programming. Of course, in EPC, their only commodity is really their resource. So they're always a little bit loath to just, copy and place because where's the money downstream of that? That's not to say they all have their own applications. Like Amec has made, they have a tool called Convero, which has been out for like 40 years. I think it started probably in Fortran, went to Cobalt and on. It was probably originally punch card. I think everybody who has any kind of programming degree touched on that. So that's what took me to Hexagon Intergraph, that I wanted to do more on the application side. But when I got there, there wasn't, and I'm going to say 2012, 2013, we were starting to see more especially in the construction industry, more things on that SaaS rollout. But there's still on-premise still dominated a lot of the stuff. So for me, when I was at Hexagon, a lot of the engineering enterprise design tools were on-premise applications. And I went through some of the pains where they were trying to re-architect them for the cloud. But, it's kind of like trying to ride a dragon, I think, to take things that were originally architected for on-prem to put into the cloud. So we saw a lot of pains with that, and just the commercial margins that can impact your ability to sell these things out in the market. But since then, what I've been attuned to, and where I think software as a service has a real implication, is that from a total cost of ownership perspective for people in construction and engineering, it's like it may not actually be cheaper, but that's not the point. They gain a lot by offshoring that risk to the provider. Right? Like the risk of disaster recovery, no delete framework, full audit traceability, all this type of stuff. And you don't have to have the worry of having like a full-time DBA tuning things to make sure it works and all that. The other piece of that I think is really critically important, and what I learned as well, and I know we're going to talk about data centricity down the road, but it's a big ask to ask anybody in construction and engineering to go entirely in one ecosystem. It's just not going to happen, right? Like when you start looking at materials management, specifications, procurement, tying into ERP, human resources, capital allocation, like they're going to have, you kind of need to have.
Each one is a system.
Yeah, and you need your eggs in different baskets, because if anything were to fall down, you're effed like 7 ways. Like you have no chance, right? So it's almost like the best practice to have these in different places. So then when you bring SaaS into the fold, for me, what it looks like is like, well, now it's really incumbent upon the providers to ensure that it can be a platform. And every construction company, every engineering company, perhaps even every owner is going to want to have a different, they may have, like it's the 80-20 rule. Like, 80% of them are going to be exactly the same in terms of what they need to accomplish, but they're going to have slightly different mechanisms in play. And I think that ability to have a platform where, you're not siloed, where, your different databases, the data sets can talk, it's critically important. And I think, a lot of SaaS applications are making that easier than having these really obtrusive on-premise installs that are kind of inherently a little bit more siloed. And I mean, I know there's a lot, people would probably agree or disagree in and about, but I mean, I think what's nice about it is that it's an easier platform, again, for construction engineering to be a part of. And it inherently, I think, allows more people to participate in those workflows. And when that happens, you can provide context, conjecture, anecdotal information, ancillary information, whatever synonym you want. It allows people to participate in your workflows and your work processes, your business processes, and ultimately yield a better product, I think. So that's a really long answer to a short question there, David. But
sorry, Jason.
It's a great answer.
Going through your career, you were a geography major, GIS and geography major, correct?
Yeah,
and a little bit
correct,
with a little bit of computer science tucked away there.
Yeah.
So, what is your touch on the infrastructure world? Like, how did you actually get involved in the infrastructure world? Were you going out collecting data? Were you putting together models? What was your actual interaction with the infrastructure over the years? And in terms of its growth, like right now, over the last 5-6 years, I've seen an exponential growth in the e-market, the electronic market, in terms of conveyance of information and in terms of use of electronic information. Well, back 5-6 years ago, this wasn't. Case in point, you got hired during COVID. That would have been an e-process. It's not like you would have gone through the standard. It's not like you would have gone through the standard, interview process where you go down, you meet a few times. I'm sure that you've had several Zoom conversations. So. And of course, here we go. The exact issues of working from home with the distractions right through. But
that's it. So hopefully you can hear me on that. But
no, that's okay. We are well aware of what.
It's okay.
For myself as well. My daughter was at home for the last couple weeks, doing homeschooling, so I'd be sitting.
Oh, it's ridiculous. Yeah.
Back to the question.
A lot to unpack there. So my career, when I and I think you're always a bit of a product of your environment, right? Like I went to school in Calgary, so there's always going to be that energy focus, right? Like that primary resource, people who came out of say like, chemical engineering or process engineering or electrical, what were they? They were either working on, like refineries, petrochemical, or maybe, the logging industry, right? Something like that. So anyways, Alberta based though, that's kind of always been the undertone of what we do. Most of the work I've done has supported that in some level. Even work that was often like heavy civil of nature, okay, would be, dams and spillways. Well, it's still power generation, right? So the hydropower or whatever. So when it came to I did some field collection just to kind of to be out there, and I'd say that was more of a vetting or validation of collection parameters we had in place for GIS to ensure that what we were collecting made sense from a design process, that design process, whatever was, we were helping collect, could propagate into, construction eventually, and then would make sense for the end customer's system of record. Right. So when it came to collecting that, I would just say, like, for me, it was always like, well, obviously this is implied by utilities, but linear assets, but it tended to be more of the mainline type of stuff is what I originally worked. So that's like your primary pipelines, right? Like not your gas and distribution to, from business to a consumer or whatever, right? It would be like the main line. So that's what I kind of cut my teeth on, was more along that stuff. Or, if it was anything from like a hydropower perspective, it would be, again, like the main power out from the facility and then to a trunk line or whatever, and then off. So I kind of looked at that from a mapping perspective, and that's where I think I have a little bit of unique perspective. Like a lot of people in the GIS space, there's that joke, GIS stands for get it surveyed, right? I mean, I think GIS is good. And that's what I went to school for. But once you see the full scope of design and then construction and execution and then operations and maintenance, you realize it is just a very small piece. And it's very, kind of like,
there's more context.
There is. And GIS is kind of like, it's the gold standard of how to lie with statistics, really. If you're not careful, right, that you can make something look, because it looks really good, and ArcGIS online, and you can make it look fantastic. But I mean, how accurate is the data? I'm not saying it's not accurate, but you can make it look accurate without it being accurate, right? And I've lived through that as well, where someone says, here's the data. And back in, like 20 odd years ago, we weren't quite using the old hockey puck with the crosshairs to digitize on a board, but it was the same thing. You'd rubber sheet, you'd stretch it out, you've got some raster image and you're clicking. It's like, now we're going to say this is like sub-meter. No, you might say it, but is it really accurate or not? So, you start going through that. And then in other places in my career, when you start looking at things, when I was at Hexagon, they were a real pioneer, them and Aviva from Enterprise Engineering Design, was that data-centric model, like knowing not only where every asset is, but in some cases it could be bolt-ups, fit-ups, welds, stuff like this. That implies a level of, obviously there's a spatial context to it, the adjacency, but in some cases it's more of a thematic representation of what's out there. It doesn't necessarily have a physical geographic location, but when you start combining the two, then it becomes, really high yield from an operations and maintenance perspective. And I think that's where what we're doing now, what 4M is doing as well, is putting that high precision into your asset management lifecycle, really, right? From a location perspective. And I think what raises the bar, Sorry.
I think that every guest that has been on this podcast, we always come back to talking about as-built and the accuracy of the data. And what a lot of the people we talk to love to say about as-builts, that they're more like as-maybes.
Yeah.
And I think that at the core of the problem of the issue that we're dealing with, that's buried utilities, I think that the transitioning between what you call documents and moving that to data, I think that's the biggest thing that's happening at the moment. And I think that companies that are leading that front are the ones that are really solving the problem.
I agree. until I went to Hexagon and really started working there, I joined as an industry consultant, so I wasn't in sales, right? And an industry consultant basically liaised between the product center proxy team, which was really the configuration and deployment or implementation, right? And then what the customer wanted. So you'd be the customer advocate internally and the product center advocate externally facing the customer to try and bring them together, right? And that's when I really started to understand the process of having something be data centric, right? And I mean, digital twin and it was really, that buzzword came out after or during the time when I was at Hexagon, but I mean, that was something they were practicing in advance of that, with the data centric model. And I think there's a few things that are really neat with it that really help. And it's, when I look at something from when you look at the asset lifecycle, okay, you start with like a conceptual design. Even before that, you're doing like strategic capital investment plan. Like where's the value? Like if we execute this project, great, we can execute it well. But if you execute the wrong project at the wrong time, you're still going to cook your shareholders' money, right? Like, I mean, you need to understand what you're doing when you're getting into it. But then, there's the conceptual design. Then you get into, front end engineering design, right? And then you get into like your detail design, your 30, 60, 90 review. And then you get from there into, you take your pipe specifications and everything that was started in your front end engineering design, crystallize and detailed. And then you're into your materials management, procurement, fabrication. Then you get into your construction, completions, commissioning, and then handover into operations and O&M. What people don't really understand is, like if you're doing a $1 billion asset or something like that, right? The total the total installed cost being $1 billion, that's great. But once the taps are on, you have to maintain that asset for probably at least 20 years, if not 50 or 60, right? And I mean, so many times you see people get to that end where you're handing over from project space, which is inherently noisy. There's so many things that are going on because you have sub-consultants and you have change orders and change management and RFIs in the field and all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And then you've got to take that into what should be an inherently clean environment. Like it should be sterilized. I mean, you want maybe version and revision history behind what is in your O&M, your clean as-built environment, but it should be like on a one-to-one level. Like I can physically see this valve and there it is on my drawing or whatever, right? And I think you see a lot of times people rush up to the end, the taps are on, whatever commodity is flowing, if that's traffic, right? If something's moving on your asset now, and the owner has almost nothing to say, like for their investment. I mean, other than it's running, now you got to operate and maintain it. And what's the first thing they do? Like they're debottlenecking, they're looking to improve it almost the second it becomes live. And the first thing they do when from a bid and a tender perspective on that, even for the operations and maintenance contracts, the people come out and say, well, we have to go as built it. Right. I mean, that's like, it's ridiculous. You literally just built this thing and you have no idea what's there. I find that like, it's an industry thing. And, I think a lot of this comes back to things like the contract ultimately, and I always like to joke and say, nobody cares about the contract until they feel the other party's in breach of the contract. But I find a lot of people, it cuts both ways. The owners don't want to be, they feel, if we put these mandates out there, we're going to encumber the design and construction phase with unrealistic, mandates that they won't be able to push to us and it's going to be a problem. And then, the EPCs or the construction companies, they're kind of looking for the minimum, right? Like they love it if someone comes back and says, hey, we don't want dumb PDFs. We want intelligent drawings that have data centricity. Whoa, yeah, we're going to have to pay way more for it. So you get this thing where nobody really puts their feet to the fire on.
So nobody's interested.
Yeah. And I mean, again, when you look at like data or a document is fine, but I think where data centric is really cool is when, your drawings and things like your bill of materials, the items that get procured, it's like, if you do one change on a pipe specification for a water main here, you can find all instances of that specification via federated query if you're data centric in terms of your design, your construction, and your O&M. And most people don't think about that. It's just kind of like a sunk cost. They build their asset and it's like, okay, well, whatever. We've always done it this way.
That actually brings up the the saying, which
Sorry, I can talk on this.
Yeah, no, that brings up the saying, which I remember clearly from Al Pacino. Everyone wants to go to the party, no one wants to stay and clean up. So that's really the analogy, which you're saying, that everyone wants to put all that effort, go to really construction, everyone build, get to that point, and then once that's done, everyone leaves the party, and there we go. Yeah,
on to the next
project. That's a great thing, Jason. That's a really great point, and I really like that in terms of the focus of what you're saying here with the data centric, which is absolutely amazing to think about how there's such an expanded world after that construction project, and there's such a wide world which we could actually do things a lot better. So that's really amazing, and it gives the minds a lot to ponder about that. So sorry, I caught you in a tangent.
No, I mean, I think it does, and it's one of these things, again, like if you look at, and someone asked me one time, they're like, well, why is data centricity really important and understanding this? And I said, well, okay, here's an example, and I almost want to do this one time at a conference or something like that, where I'm speaking about data centricity, and I have 4 sons, and my older 2, they'd be too good at this now, but maybe my younger 2, there's a big gap between number 2 and number 3. But anyway, maybe I do this with my younger 2, and I have a video rolling in the upper right corner. And I heard this once from my oldest son, and he called, Lego, instead of instructions, he called them constructions. And I'm like, that's actually a salient point, because why does Lego work? Okay. You look at each page. So everybody dumps their Lego out and you put it by color. Right. And you've got all the different pieces that are there. Why does it work? It works because, there's everything is like, I guess, not homogenous. It's like well, no, that's not the right term either. But like, it's all Lego. You're not trying to build it with mega blocks, Lego, plasticine, and pipe cleaners or something like that. Right. When you start doing data-centric models, okay, what happens when someone's building each page? It's like, okay, I need these 4 pieces. That's equivalent to like your bill of materials. Great. But you can see on a data center, you're not just looking at the drawing. It's telling you what pieces you need to construct. What I was doing with my kids, just as an example, I did this for my father one time to try and explain it to him while we were there. And I had the younger guy looking at the page, grabbing all the pieces that were needed and giving them to the older brother to build. Right. So one of them was, and it was like, that's inherently part of the construction process anyway. So it's not like I have anything profound here, but the reason it works is because it is data centric. You can actually find these little pieces. What happens, and again, this is the trickle on of like going from that issued for construction, which ends up in the ground in utilities, and then it gets backfilled. So it's never as built at all. Like you say, it's as maybe'd. You've got someone that's looking, there's more accountability all through the process, because someone has to account for the data specificity of what the design is and then how it's executed in construction as well. So it implies more accountability through the entire process, which should land at a finished product that is known, right? I mean, you can actually physically start counting all the data pieces of the assembly, the constructability of what was built.
See it coming
together, yeah. Right? So, I mean, again, it's like kind of like you start a little snowball and roll it down the hill, it becomes a big one. I mean, that can be good or bad, right? I mean, if you start bad in design, you're going to end up with a big heap and pile. Well, okay, your commodity is working, your assets on, but what have you got for it? Versus the other approach, which might be a little bit slower. And again, I feel like in some cases when you're talking to people, it's almost like having conversations with children about this kind of stuff. Like they clean the room, and what do? You open the closet once and you get killed by a landslide. It's just kind of everybody just kind of pushes stuff off to the side, right? But I mean, it's kind of how the industry works in some ways, right? So, anyways,
how do you connect this to what's happening in the utility space?
Well, I mean, for me, I'll say one thing. Like so I've spent time in refineries, industrial facilities, and I always used to say the kind of joke like, hey, if there's rust on it, it probably needs, you probably need to understand your asset structure more. And they're like, dude, these support beams, they're rusted before we assemble them. I'm like, yeah, exactly. That's the joke. Like, it's immediately being built and you have no idea.
To make us feel more comfortable.
So, and that's with something that you can physically see. So, this is like, I can look at a drawing, I can look at the bill of materials for something, walk into that, unit in a facility and say, this isn't what I can see right in front of me. That happens all the time. And that's with things that you can see. So, I mean, let's just take the human condition and say now you've got things that are 10 feet underground or 20 feet underground. How, like, in what sane mind would someone trust that when we physically see it, it's not the way it is, right? So, and then you look at it and you say, well, generally infrastructure, oddly things that support just the day to day, like a lot of this stuff has been put in the ground like over 70 years ago, right? And I mean, you look at the metrics, there's 2.5 million miles of road in North America. And that's basically, roadways are a free right of way, essentially. So many utilities are buried under or adjacent to a roadway. The number is there's 35 million miles of utility lines underneath the roadways, right? So, I mean, I think a lot of these things are just in disrepair. And then because it's sight unseen, the other thing that you have is people, like, you get horizontal directional drilling, that's improved over time. So people are just like, hey, just plug it into the ground and that thing will snake along. If it finds something, it'll just move. Well, how do you even as-build that now? You've got an as-design issue for construction drawing, but that thing has a bit of a mind of its own when it starts going in. Like the pipe lengths are, when they're boring, are about, they're like, 10 feet long for like a 3-inch or 4-inch pipe. It's like, well, this thing's moving all over the damn place. So I don't know, but I mean, I've seen when ground gets exposed, just they did it the other day on my block, well, not the other day, a few months ago. And it's like, you look in it, I'm walking around and talking to the Volker Steven guys. And I'm like, how do you know what's there? Like, well, I have no idea. And it's like, well, no doubt, like I have no idea what I'm looking at. And this is my industry. So, you're just looking at dirt colored pipes, it's like, well, good luck on intelligently figuring out where this stuff is.
Hang on.
Right? So, I mean,
are you on 14th Street right now with the BRT then?
No, I'm not. No, I live down in Willow Park.
Okay, yeah, we were talking about that.
Yeah. So, but, I mean, I think there's for the utility industry, there's a lot of improvement that could be out there. And then, the other thing too, I think there's a problem, and, Ophir, because we were talking with Steve Slusarenko about the NUAR initiative in the UK, the National Underground Asset Registry, and maybe is there something we could do in Canada for that? And it's like, and then you have things like, like your telcos, and they view this as like IP, right? Like, so, and they kind of are in if they have the regulatory permission to operate in a place, they're just going to go in and do it. Like, be damned with anybody else. And I guess from a commercial, I mean, they're a slave to their shareholders like any publicly traded company. Like, why wouldn't you do that? But then, to try and, like, where's the diplomacy to say, hey, okay, is there a better way of doing this? And I mean, I think that's where I think it's really cool what they're trying to do with the NUAR initiative in the UK. But it's like, I mean, really, that's not much of an engineering problem. That's more of a legal and diplomatic program to try and get everybody to bring their data together, right?
Well, hang on.
I'm going off on words.
I'm gonna ask you a question right now. The actual pedigree of the data which is brought forth, and they're going to be giving different levels of pedigree. They're going to say, well, it's accurate enough to get you started, and understanding that and having that as a first initial understanding is that most important thing, knowing that it's not going to be perfect, but knowing that at least I'll have it accountable, that I'll have the accounting for it, saying, okay, I have 15 utilities accounted for, and now I can actually take that next step and start looking for them. Like, isn't that the whole point of NUAR, just to have an accountability within it? And, we talk about IP and so on and so forth, but, the truth be known, if it's going to be about accountability and it's going to be out benefit for the good of the people, of course you may have your objections, but you're going to go along with it at the end because you want to be a part of society, or you want to be a part of the solution per se. Do you see anything along those lines with the new Canadian utility infrastructure?
I'm getting the sense it could be, I mean, I think inherently there's a couple of things that I think are always going to be a barrier in Canada. Like, we're just so geographically dispersed, right? That I think that's always going to create a little bit of a problem. But, what you've said, I think you said a lot, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And it really is about accountability, and I think when you look at things, for me, there's a couple threads to pull out. Number one is safety, right? Like, when I was in university, And, I talked to my father, who's like, he's about 70 now, right? And like safety was kind of like, okay, it was like you got a mug and a bag for if they had so many, million hours without a lost time incident. But like now it's serious. Like it is legitimately serious stuff. If companies cannot execute, like if they have too many claims in an area, they may not even be able to insure their own projects, so they can't even bid on them. So safety is no joke. I mean, it literally has to be there. And then there's the aspect of just like that I think there's the optics of being part of a public pool, which are good, right? And you see companies doing that. And I think about this on the energy side, and hopefully this, thread kind of ties things together here, at least it does in my mind, but you guys can verify this for me. But like, it's like, energy companies often invest in renewables strictly because of optics. From an actual shareholder financial perspective, they don't have they're not really, it's not that good. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But what makes sense for them initially is to bring it online. They have the capacity to do the work and they're getting government, they're taking advantage of subsidies to bring an asset online, and then they sell it somewhere that can deal with smaller margins, smaller points on the, Enbridge will bring something online and then sell it to the Ontario teachers
pension board, OMERS
pension board or whatever. And it's like, they're fine with 3.5 points per year. I mean, Enbridge, their shareholders will be like, clamoring at the gates if they're only getting 3.5 on something. Right. So, but I think the same type of thing, the optics really should matter to these companies, right? I mean, people are being more and more ethical in their decisions. And I think when you start to see companies that are not participating in kind of things that are good for society, and you can put enough, points on the ledger to say, hey, this is good from a safety perspective, economic perspective, it prevents perhaps the appearance of collusion between some of these, telcos and various companies. I think all these are things that, people have to be respectful of. The same thing, like when people it's disruptive, right? And I mean, I think you're seeing things that can very instantly be disruptive. And, these monoliths, I mean, it doesn't take much for some of these companies. And I've seen it in the midstream industry where, you get like who is it? Enbridge bought Spectra, right? Like 2 years before that, everybody thought there's no chance that could happen. It's like, well, giants rise and fall all the time. And I mean, we're seeing that even more prolifically now. So I think not doing your best to try and kind of, and I'm not saying you have to kowtow to like the public sentiment, but there's an element of that I think is really important. I'd like to see that more in Canada and the US, more collaborative to say, hey, this is really for the betterment. And the other thing too is optically, and this is another thing that I've seen in Calgary, and I'm staunchly a supporter of oil and gas. I think it's very important moving forward. You can't just say, hey, everybody go green. But I'm not also obtuse to the fact that, hey, the rest of Canada, the rest of the world, they see when the oil and gas industry is going crazy and people spend money like drunks at a blackjack table. Optically, that's bad. You don't get public sentiment in your favor when you do that. So you could steward your business in a better way, right? And I think the same way when you start seeing people just hemorrhaging dollars every day to get their telco costs, and it's like, like people with like a TELUS bill now with phones, and so they could be spending $300 a month. It's like, eventually someone's going to come by that's going to disrupt that. And it's going to be like, tell us, see you later. You didn't do anything for us before. You could have been doing better. Right. And I think those kind of things are often not well thought of when people make their decisions.
I'm going to ask you a question, and talking about disruption, talking about all these different things. What happens when legislation comes to bear? For example, in Colorado, how is that?
Like our mandate.
Well, exactly. What's going on with what I see with the Canadian utility infrastructure registration is literally what has been done in Colorado through legislation.
Right.
So,
well, and I think so. That mandate number one is really good. And I think the second thing, mandates are usually precipitated off of something, and I think what really kind of tipped the needle, and it predated my time, so this isn't my story, but I kind of make it a little bit my story because of the company. But there was an explosion in Colorado, and I think 4 or 5 people lost their life.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
an old lady's house, if I'm not mistaken.
Like you look, I mean, I like, can you imagine being a foreman and having to make that call to someone? Like no one wants, like, I mean, nobody wants, like, your son goes off to the military or something. Okay, fine. They're a first responder, police officer. There's inherently that kind of risk. But like, is it fair to say just because a guy's a pipeline construction worker that they should inherit that kind of risk? Like, that's crazy, right? But I mean, someone had to make that call. That was really what precipitated that mandate. Someone said, hey, there's probably a better way of doing this, and we have to do something now,
So, sorry, hang on. Just to press it, just for everyone's information who's listening, if you look up the Colorado governing laws regarding one call, so right now Colorado actually governs that any public project that is going forth in the public right-of-way must have a SUE investigation prior to actually executing the work and actually going up for construction. So it's really put down another level of due diligence and duty of care on the actual constructability, the feasibility, and also the safety factor, that when it finally goes to construction and they get those one call marks, those are just the confirmations for excavation and not on the fly engineering and hoping for the best. So
that's awesome summary. I should, watch that and repeat, because that's I could use that in my own pitches.
Yeah, but as long as you say, Ophir from 4M sets this, I'm good with that.
That's right. There we go. Yeah, qualify. Yeah, like Socrates or something like that, right? But yeah, no, it's that's it. And I mean, like you say, the SUE investigation is out there, right? And I mean, everybody's aware. Well, maybe not everybody, but there's the different classifications of the quality of data, and it's a perception, but the category A, B, C, and D, right? And I mean, so like when you get that category A, that's only when you can physically daylight, or I'd even go so far as to say, really, it's almost in your as building, right? You've got an open trench, something you can physically see the asset, a valve, the pipe, top of pipe, and you can survey that in. And then how you propagate that data downstream of that. And we know there's a certain amount of like interpolation between points because it's sight unseen. You're not going to, dig up a trench so you can see your physical asset everywhere. That's fine. But to take that, do that SUE investigation, right? Not only does it give you perspective on what's in the ground and what's around, but then, I look at it, the importance of that mandate for, say, like in Colorado, it does a couple things. Number one, Colorado's drawn a line in the earth, and they've said, okay, this accident happened. Now, inside the CDOT, Colorado Department of Transportation right-of-way, thou shalt do this, period. So they know from this day forth, everything that they reposit into their production environment or their system of record, they may not know outside of with 100% accuracy of where these utilities are, but they know in their right-of-way, they're de-risking future shovels.
Hang on, they're also going forward. They're implementing AC75, so the Asphalt Standard. So they're working both hand in hand, the before, the during, and then the after.
That's right. So everything that's going to go in there from that date when they put that mandate down, they know that date is good. And I mean, they're requiring, like, they're going to have that audit traceability. They can see which company collected it, when it was collected, the quality, the pedigree of that information, and not only that, but like, there's that benchmark pedigree that's acceptable. If they get stuff that's unacceptable, it's like, well, they'll return it. It's like, hey, contractually, you haven't met your obligation to this project.
Interesting.
Whether it be brownfield or greenfield. That's really important type stuff, Like, so over time, over duration, what will they have? They'll have a very good asset database, right? So I think, those type of mandates are really important, number one. And number two, when you get them out there, and this is from a commercial perspective for anybody operating there, I think, some people could say, hey, does it cannibalize your opportunity to do better work with other companies? Some people feel encumbered, like, oh, damn, I don't want to do CDOT work because I have to do this. Well, maybe, but again, this comes back to the optics. If your peers are doing that, right, like eventually, are you going to find yourself on an island that's crumbling around your feet because you refuse to provide enhanced deliverables or have a better level of engagement in the field via your processes, right? Like, this is an opportunity for people to do better work. And generally it's a sunk cost anyways. Like, if I look at the locating industry, people go out, they locate, they paint a mark on the ground. Great. Okay. They're out there already, it's not that much more incrementally to get better information that someone can use. Right. And I mean, I look at things where, someone paints the ground and then a surveyor is going to go out there and survey a paint mark. Like, I mean, surveyors don't like that. like surveyors are precise by nature, and like there's imprecision by nature in surveying a paint mark on the ground, right? So, I mean, all this type of stuff, I mean, again, sometimes you keep competing with the operational cost of it's always been this way, and I get it, and it's not going to be instantaneous, but these types of mandates, I think incrementally over time, people say, okay, yeah, based on the merit of different applications, different processes, different techniques, we know we can get a better level of accuracy. And I think it's important for everybody to understand there's a lot of ramification and there's value in being able to do that too.
Jason, that's so much. You've really given us a lot to think about, and collectively, I think that all the different firms out there working to gain solutions in this space. What's before? What are you coming into, and what are you going to get out of it? The input and the output, right through and through. David, I'm looking at our time right now, and I think not that I wanted to do this, but there's so much to think about, so much to talk about here. We could have you on for another 4 hours and keep on going. David, yeah.
I think we need to end with our two final
every
questions
time,
that we ask every guest.
Okay.
So first question, in 2 or 3 sentences, what do you think is the biggest, the most meaningful thing that our industry needs to change?
Ooh.
Going back to Socrates' quotes.
Yeah.
Robert De Niro is also good.
I think, and maybe this is too general, but I believe, in construction and engineering, people are well-intended. These are very bright people, right? Like when you start talking to a surveyor who understands geodesy, mapping, like there's no joke. These guys are smart. They're literally like rocket scientists, right?
They know what
they're talking about. I think, technology has advanced so quickly, and what we've seen from construction and stuff, like oddly, jobs are not being done any better than they were 30 years ago. That's an indictment on the industry. I think there's a lot of apathy, and I think it's individually people need to understand they have to be, as we talked about, accountability. I think the accountability for everybody to say, I want to associate my name with a better quality. Be damned with what we've done in the past, right? There has to be, there's the opportunity cost of doing things better. Just because we've always done it this way doesn't make it better. And I'm getting older and crotchety, like with my boys, I'll tell them like, screw it. Like this is the way I've always done it. It's wrong. I mean, you have to always be continually innovating. And these people are fully capable of innovating and looking for enhancements. And I think when you do that, there's better ways, and I mean, you do the classic thing, you guys are in software too, right? Like, like when someone's talking to you, like, well, we've always done it this way. This is the way we do our process. Well, if you want to replicate exactly the way you're doing it now, why are you talking to me about software or 4M? Like, we're offering you a better way of doing something, right? A faster way or whatever. And I think people need to have an open mind to that. So I don't know if that's quite the answer you're looking for, but I think
anything,
your opinion.
Anything you would have said, we would have accepted. And
second question, Jason. Sure. Who do you think we should have in our podcast next?
Ooh, who would be good next?
I'm waiting for Paige to get in touch with me, by the way, because I always like talking to Paige. But
Paige would be a good one. Yeah. I mean, he's pretty passionate about this as well.
But we'll give it a few weeks in between you and him, so that you can get your 10 minutes of fame with us, and then we can bring him in for his.
I think there's one of them. Have you guys had Rob on?
Rob Martindale, he's a very good potential. He's one of the catalysts for the change in the industry. So he
is.
Yeah. It's just a matter of securing time with him, of course. But
exactly. So Rob Martindale, we're coming for you.
Yeah, I think he'd be a good one for you guys. I think there's a lot of people that are pretty passionate about it. And one thing I would say kind of ties into my last comment. Like there's. And this is one of the things that I know, like, we talked about operations, that data and managing an asset once it's done, once you get into the O&M cycle. when you're trying to change something on the operations side of business, like those mandates, like with federal or state or an owner operator, that's really tough because they only have a finite amount of money to spend, and generally they have to replace an existing process. So it's not just net new. A lot of this can be pushed, I think, on the project space, because if you get the right PM that says, I'm going to do something different, and usually the PMs are hired. Why? Because they get jobs done on time and on budget. Right. But if you catch them at the right time, I think a lot of these initiatives, these enhancements, the better deliverables, they can look and say, and you can appeal to their sense to want to do better, to be kind of like, on the soapbox, look at what I did for this company. Right. And I think project space is really active, and there can be a lot of improvements from that, because if projects is executed well, it's going to go to operations. Right. So anyway,
fantastic. You know what? Into just a real summary of everything that we've been talking about in the past 12 episodes, and there is that focus which all of us have to do better, and collectively I think we're going to get there. And I think I keep on, the funny thing is, I did these podcasts with David and our associated guests, and I keep on going back to them and picking up these little tidbits from our different guests and going, wait a minute, I'm actually going to incorporate that into my day-to-day, because that is a really logical thing, and that is a great thing. And Jason, I'll tell you today, I've really appreciated. I've taken a lot of different things which you've said, and I'm also going to apply them within my my day-to-day realm, because they really work. And even if that one little thing, if you take that one little nugget out of every single conversation and you apply it into your life as a best practice, you're going to be doing a lot better than you were today. You're going to be doing a lot better than you were yesterday, just by compiling and adding information to your life and actually using it. So,
I think that's a good way to work. I try and do a similar thing. For both, it's like that kind of, if you have a 0.5% improvement per day and you're compounding that, it's like, I mean, it's almost unrealistic. Like, could you be doubly effective in a year? Well, I don't know, but
because you're always going to have that day where you're going to take away 10% by doing something stupid.
That's right. Yeah, totally.
But the truth is, mistakes are the best way to learn anything. And if you don't learn from your mistakes, then you're failing to do them. But if you keep on learning from what you've done wrong and applying those lessons, hey, the sky's the limit. So, David, I'll let you.
I agree. Wrap it up.
So, Jason, thank you so much. We really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll have another episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to anytime. We'll catch up. I'm sure I'll probably overlap with Ophir at a conference or two.
One or two.
Definitely.
Wonderful, I'm sure.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Jason.